Okay, so good morning, congregation. That was the original title for this message this morning. But the deeper I got into it, and I thought when I was going to do this, it was only 4 Sundays and then I'll print the things off. But the more that I have researched this whole subject, it has got me absolutely fascinated because we are heading into a time on this earth that is prophesied, but none of us would really understand how catastrophic it's going to be, and based around one particular individual. Now, the issue is that's the heading for the message. But do you know what I was doing over the last 2 nights when I was putting this together? I actually wrote another heading on top of my notes, and the heading was, "Whatever happened to education?" Whatever happened to education? And my next birthday is 70, so I was at least at the changeover, going to school in 1959 and understanding things. You see, for at least 15 years after that, I got taught history, I got taught geography, I got taught civics, I got taught logic. A lot of the things that have disappeared from the programs in schools these days. And so and I'm not looking at anyone here, but for the last probably 30 years, we've been educating mushrooms in darkness. They don't know anything. Do you know what I mean? And so I've got this map up here, and I'm going to explain to you because it's actually quite relevant to what we're going to do today. That is the Eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea down there, there's Saudi Arabia, there's Egypt, there's the, you could call it the Mesopotamia, and then Turkey and all the way back up to Greece. And the whole point is that if you mention that to younger people these days, they wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about. And so when you preach from this Bible, have you ever realized that the Old Testament is a history book written by God and is the best history book you'll ever get? And I was digging and digging and digging. And the reason I want to point out one thing on that map is you see that little sort of dialogue box on your left-hand side. Just to the right of it, there's a little island in the Eastern Mediterranean, and that's called Cyprus. And when I was schooled in initially prophecy because of Chuck Missler, he poisoned me for life, And what I always wondered about when I was doing Daniel was there was help for Egypt when Antiochus Epiphanies was coming down for his 3rd attempt to try and take over Egypt. It says the ships of Kittim came to help Egypt. And I thought, where on earth is Kittim? But you know me, someone said to me last week, 30 years ago, after last week's message, they said to me, 30 years ago you were mining gold. And they said, thank goodness now you're mining the Bible. And I thought that was sort of quite pointed, actually. But Kittim is actually Cyprus. And what had happened was, it was still Kittim then, and so the Roman Empire, which was in its nascent growing stage, they knew that if you wanted to rule all around the Mediterranean, you had to control the ships on the sea of the Mediterranean. So in Cyprus, they built their first naval base, and they were able to control the shipping, especially the Phoenicians from Lebanon, in that area. And so that was one of the things that I just dug up. So if you were to read Daniel now and you see ships from Kittim came and helped, blah, 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 you wouldn't know where Kittim is. Well, I hope you know that where Kittim is now. It's Cyprus. And that was a naval base for the Roman army or empire. So when Alexander the Great was dying at the age of 33 from a terrible, shall we say, malady in Babylon, he was asked to whom he should give his empire to. Now, he had a younger brother, but he was insane, and he had 2 reprobate sons who couldn't be trusted, and his military hierarchy was jostling for a slice of the action, and there was 4 main generals that were sort of positioning themselves to take over parts of it at least. And after Alexander's death, the 4 most powerful generals took charge and divided the empire between them. The 2 minor officers, Cassandra and Lysimachus, took firstly Macedonia and Greece, that was Lysimachus, and Cassander got Turkey, which is Asia Minor. And the 2 strong guys were Seleucus, who got Syria, and all the way to northwestern India. He basically got the Persian Empire plus Lebanon and ancient Israel. And so the last general was Ptolemy, who got Egypt. Now, Seleucus and Ptolemy did not get on. So Seleucus got the big part and Ptolemy got the riches of Egypt, which was sort of like even Stevens. And there was already bad blood between these 2 because they each wanted to mimic Alexander and to take over the entire empire for themselves, which caused ongoing warfare between the 2 regions for more than 200 years. And, there's nothing new under the sun. There have been power centres over the last 2,500 years that have always been trying to take over someone else's land and resources. And so it's just part and parcel of human nature, and it's bound in history, and it actually forms history more than often. And so the two generals, Seleucus and Ptolemy, were always at warfare with each other, and when they passed away, their replacements were carrying on this war. Now, if you see Seleucus is mainly the top part, and then Egypt, and you see what's in the middle. So Seleucus was always coming down to try and attack Egypt, and Egypt was coming back up. And who was the meat and the anvil? Israel. It was always getting beaten up because that was one of the battlegrounds that was used as a fighting place. And so because as believing Christians, we know that God the Father has everything under control. Even these things, even these 2 men, these 2 empires, it's there for a reason. And I'm going to tell you why the reason is, because if you don't understand history, you're never going to understand the future, because it's just history repeated, because human nature never changes. And so we know that he is in control of every single thing for every generation of human beings for Genesis and Revelation. And let me pull it right down to a personal nature. Whatever has happened to you, good, bad, and ugly in your life, God knew. Before the creation of this world, he knew. He even knew that you guys were going to be here today. He knew that what you were going to wear. And he knows right now what you're thinking. And you're going, oh, helmet of silence. You know what? The trouble is he does know everything. And we try and drag him down so that we can understand him. No, he lifts us up to put our faith in him. And everything that happens, and it happens for a reason. And God plans and knows everything that does happen. And this is where Jesus says this thing that came up in my mind when I was writing this. It's Matthew 10:29-33. Jesus said this, and it really hits me because when we wake up in the morning, we look out our windows in the bedroom, and we're in an older suburb, so we've got wooden power line lampposts. So we've got power lines going across, and we also have a little bit of a thing on top of our balcony. And we often get inundated by birds coming and perching either on our balcony or on the power lines just across the road. And they fascinate me. They absolutely fascinated me. Some of them are so absolutely beautiful. You've just got to give God the credit for his creation. Do you know what I mean? We look at mountains, we look at seas, we look at all the rest of it. But when we get these little birds in the morning, that sort of thing, I always remembered this one. And this is Jesus saying when he's trying to teach a whole group of guys to become evangelists and go out 2 by 2. And he says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin?" And 2 sparrows was the least you could bring to the temple as an offering. That's the offering of very poor people. And when Joseph and Mary took Jesus to the temple on the 31st day after his birth, because she had to be ritually clean, and it was 40 days for a male baby and 80 for a female baby, they went into the temple in Jerusalem to dedicate Jesus to his father, and the only thing that they could bring up was 2 turtle doves. They were dirt poor. So when you see the nativity scenes in the lambing cave with the shepherds and the magi, you know that you've got someone who doesn't understand the ritual, right? They didn't come until later on. And that's when they had the money to flee from Herod and go down to Egypt and then come back and do a wide berth around Jerusalem, go back up to Nazareth. Because Archelaus was there and he was worse than his father. So are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin, and not one of them falls to the ground. Now listen to this. Apart from your Father's will, not knowledge. Do you see the word? It's will. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. This is all of these guys he's training. And do not fear, therefore, for you are more value than many sparrows. Therefore, now he's used the first 2 verses to prove this. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, that is, accepts Jesus, believes in Jesus, puts his trust in Jesus, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. And here's the kicker in 33. But whoever denies me before men, rejects me, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. And the Father knows everything and Jesus knows everything, so you can't dodge that judgment. And that's why he says, he compares 2 sparrows and mankind who either accept him or reject him. And following on from that, these 2, we're going back to the history now, following on from that, these 2 warring regions, Egypt and Syria, were there to produce, in the Father's will, a prophetic forerunner of the final world-controlling despot, the one that's coming on the horizon, the antichrist, the seed the seed of Satan, the supernatural seed of Satan. For a period of a little over 10 years, we go back now 2,200 years, one Antiochus Epiphanies, the head of the Syrian Empire, comes to prominence as a political prisoner in Rome, but he is released in 175 BC, according to the Father's will. This has to happen. His brother, in the meantime, had been ruling the Seleucid Empire, and he was murdered by another challenger, Heliodorus. So Antiochus got rid of Heliodorus and assumed leadership of the empire with one of his nephews, the two of them together, and the nephew was, murdered just a little bit later. And I tell you what, history's fascinating. I'm absorbed by the history of Roman emperors, do you know what I mean? You didn't ever want to be a Roman Empire. If you lasted 6 months, you were lucky. Because either your mother was poisoning you, your son was poisoning you, your wife was poisoning you, you was being stabbed. It was, don't be an emperor. Don't ever be an emperor. And so Seleucus got this, Antiochus Epiphanes got supreme power. And because of the ongoing warfare between Egypt and Syria, ancient Israel was always the meat in the sandwich. And Antiochus hated Judaism because he was a promoter of Hellenism, Greek culture, and continually pressed Hellenistic religion and his gods onto the Jewish people. Now, the fascinating thing for me is that a portion of the Jewish population actually sided with Antiochus and to some degree adopted his Hellenistic gods, religion, and customs. And if you're awake to modern Israel, there is a large leftist cabal in Israel who's trying to drag Netanyahu down, sign some kind of peace accord with Hamas, and say, let's be friends. I mean, that's how idiotic these people are. And so what happened was a mere some 3 or 4 years ago, I think it might have changed now after October 7, but a mayor said about 3 or 4 years ago, it's estimated that there are 70,000 Messianic Jews in Israel, right? That's 1% of the population, 1%. And when I look at that and people go, oh, that's terrible, well, I'm wondering what percentage of Western society are born-again Christians. There's a lot of people who go to church, but they don't believe in Jesus. Let me tell you, they think that's the good thing to do. And so nothing has changed because there were people who sided with the enemy, even in ancient Israel. It's like, how on earth did we get our present Prime Minister? Seriously. Richard Marles and a couple of the other guys there have got 10 times his intellect, but they weren't allowed to become the Prime Minister. Do you understand? And how did we get Trudeau, Macron, Starmer in England, everyone that shouldn't be in national leadership are there? And oh dear, I've told you what Pauline Hanson said when she was in Senate. I'm surrounded by people who haven't got a clue what they're doing. They get members of parliament or candidates for seats as parliamentarians, and they don't want sharp, knowledgeable, intelligent, conscious people with a moral compass. The two parties don't want that. They want duddards to do what they are told. And so we have the governments that we get because the best people are left aside. They don't want intelligent people with consciences, with morals, with standards. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having what we've got. And I tell you what, when we were at Billabong at the last state election, we had Peter Abetz and we had that lady Grunfeld from the Christian Lobby, Australian Christian Lobby. And I said, listen, and I'm talking about my own mother and father because they came through the Great Depression. So guess what they always voted? Labor. But we were watching over the last few nights a series called The Village in England. And when you saw the conditions that people in the from 1900 onwards, the poor people in the village and then the stately lords in their castle, no wonder they all voted Labor for so long. And so what I really do grieve over is you don't listen to the positions of the people who are asking for your vote. You only look at blue, Liberal or red Labor. It's disgusting. And we get the government that we deserve. And I pleaded with the congregation that many years ago, if you don't like the other party, please vote for the minor parties that are in the Senate and who can block terrible legislation. And did they? No. It was disgraceful. That guy that got kicked out in 5 days, and I know what he got kicked out for, I'm not going to tell you. He got there in a landslide. And do you know why, when I was asking people, why did you vote for him? Oh, well, he's a strong man. And when we were in Russia in 1997, in the countryside in this camp, I naturally gravitate to all the old people because they get ignored most of the time. And all of these old Russian ladies were having lunch, and it was a beautiful day. And through a translator, I was asking them about what they think of Russia now, and they go, oh, no good, no good, no good. And I said, well, when was it good? And do you know what they said? Under Stalin. Because they were young and under Stalin. And I said to the lady, ask them why. And do you know what they said? He was a strong man. See, if you project strength, then the electorate will gravitate to you. Do you know what I mean? But it's all smoke and mirrors, because you have all of these media people projecting who you should be, but in reality, you're not really, all right? And that's why we've got the governments we have. So there's nothing under the sun that's new. And so Antiochus, for the third time, attacked Egypt, and this time Rome got involved because they didn't want him to get that wealth as well. And this is where it says, the ships of Kittim, that Cyprus, came and helped and came alongside the Jewish patriots and helped even Egypt to repel Antiochus. So enraged was Antiochus that on the way north through Jerusalem, his soldiers joined with the Jewish apostates, that's the non-believers, to attack the Jewish people and to trash the temple. And all temple worship was banned. And on the Sabbath, Greek soldiers slaughtered men, women, and children who had come to the temple on the Sabbath. And the daily offerings were stopped. And they added to this the slaughtering of a pig on the altar of sacrifice in the court of Israelites outside the main temple, and boiled pigs. Now, give me a break, because they had a big laver there. They boiled pigs in the laver to make gallons of pig broth, which they poured out on every surface in the temple, rendering it unclean. But the most monstrous event occurred when the soldiers erected a statue of Zeus in the holy place. Now, not the Holy of Holies, but the holy place. And believing Jews at that time called it the abomination of desolation. So that was 150 years before Jesus came on the scene. And that abomination of desolation, and the description of that phrase is that which makes a place empty and lifeless. And that's what happens when that kind of darkness settles on a place of worship. And Daniel prophesies of that future event in chapter 9:27, because that happened in Antiochus's time 2,200 years ago. But this is what Daniel says 2,600 years ago. This is history written in the future. And then he, this is chapter 9:27, then he, and I've decided now, I get sick and tired of the antichrist name because it's not accurate. I now call him Antiochus II. And I think that's a fitting name for him. So then he, the future Antiochus, shall confirm a covenant, a peace covenant with Israel for 1 week. It says the many, but that's a euphemism for Israel. It's either the residue, the remainder, or the many. But in the middle of the week, smack dab in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, just like Antiochus. There's nothing new under the sun. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, this guy that's coming. And even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. And even Jesus acknowledges that the abomination of desolation happened in Israel 150 years before him, but he's also going to say there's going to be another one. So he's warning us, and we should be reading this and understanding history and then prophecy, because it all fits together if you exegete it correctly. And Jesus said this in 24:15, Matthew 24:15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet in chapter 9:27, standing in the holy place, and listen to this, whoever reads, let him understand. It's a parenthetical insert there, I would say, by Matthew, all right? And whenever we're reading the Bible, we should be understanding what we're reading. And I want to go now to the historical sequence that is written by Daniel in chapter 11, and it starts at 36 to verse 45. Now, in Daniel chapter 11, verse 1 to 35, is Antiochus, the history of Antiochus. But without any warning, the verse switches to the future. And you've got to be a very good exegete to do this on your own, but there's some good people out there on media that will come to you. Chuck Missler's very good on this one, and John MacArthur and a few of the others. So verse 36 says this, then the king, this is the coming Antiochus. That's why he's even called the king instead of the Antichrist. Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god and speak monstrous things against the God of gods. And we know that this is not the first Antiochus, because he promoted the Hellenic gods. So this is not Antiochus I, this is Antiochus II that's coming. I'm telling you right now, he's alive. And he's just champing at the bit to come on the world scene. But what has to happen before that happens? We're out of here. I was going to get a dog, but that means I'd have to leave it behind. But well, we had one dog, and I would have begged Jesus, can I take him up? He was human, that dog. He was brilliant. And he will exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. That's God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And he will prosper until the indignation which is the 7-year tribulation, is finished. For that which is decreed will be done. Look what Daniel has written under the unction of the Holy Spirit. Whatever is decreed by the will of the Father, it will come to pass, it will be done, and it will be finished. Do you understand? You can go to the bank with that. And verse 37, and he, this future one coming, he will show no regard for the gods of his father. Now, this has always troubled me, because there was an amorphous understanding of who he was and where he'd come from, and everyone was speculating everything you could imagine. But now that Fruchtenbaum is really stuck on, because of Daniel 9:24-27, he is the prince of the people who shall come in 70 AD and destroy of the Jerusalem and temple in 70 AD. And I'm actually really moving now to think that he has some kind of Italian background or Roman background, whether it's from the empire or from the nation. But he will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, and if he's Roman, you can make sense out of that, or for the desire of women. And so many people say, even good people say, oh, he must be a homosexual. No, he's not a homosexual, because the desire of women is a Jewish euphemism for the woman who is blessed to bear the Messiah for Israel. And who was that? That was Mary. Nor will he show regard for any other god. So you know it's no one else that's been in history. For he will magnify himself above them all. And verse 38, but instead he will honour a god of fortresses. And a lot of the speculation is Satan, because if he's just in the verses before, he will wipe every other god and magnify himself above every other god. So if he honours a god of fortresses, who's left? Satan, his father. Do you understand? It can only be that. There's no other secret god hiding around there that he's going to honour. It's only Satan, and I'll show you in Revelation 13 if we get here at the time. But instead he will honour a god of fortresses, a god whom his fathers did not know, and he will honour him with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. And verse 39, and he will take action against the strongest of fortresses with the help of this foreign god. This is Satan. And he will give great honour to, now listen to this, he will give great honour to those who acknowledge him. What does that mean? You take the mark. Silly them. Silly them. That dooms you forever in perdition. He will, for those who acknowledge him, and will cause them to rule over the many. Once again, Israel. And will parcel out land for a price. If you understand what's coming and you understand what happened in the past, everything makes sense. And what follows now from 40 onwards is the end of the first 3.5 years. Listen to this carefully and work it out while I'm reading it out. And verse 40 says this, at the end time, this is the tribulation, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships, and he, Antiochus II, will enter countries, overflow them, and pass through. So they attack him, but they can't get him. And in verse 41, he says this, he will also enter the beautiful land, that's Israel, and many countries will fall, but these will be rescued out of his hand. Stop, look, listen, think, and understand. Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. And that's a little patch on the east of the Jordan. Would it not be Rob and Deb, just back from this very place, alive, by the way, and we'll let you give some kind of report on that. But, you know, it's Edom, Moab, and Ammon, and it's Gentile territory on the east of the Jordan. And that fascinates me, because you would think with all of the technology, all of the armaments, all of the power, the spiritual power as well as the physical power, nothing would be beyond him. But what's the Father's will here? That those three places will be untouched by him. You see, the Father rules everything. And don't think that he's a corporate manager. He plans every day of your life. And you can either go with him or you can go against him. And that determines how good a day you get, all right? So that's, you know, I've learned that. I was as stubborn as a little mongrel. But anyway, I've given myself over to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and it's been quite good ever since then. Yeah. Then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. You see, the first Antiochus couldn't get Egypt, but this one does. In verse 43, it says this, but he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt and the Libyans, that's the Maghreb, that's the north coast of Africa above the Sahara Desert, and the Cushites, and I showed you a map of the Cushites last week, I think. And it was Moses that married Zipporah, and she was a Cushite. And Aaron and Miriam didn't like that. Will follow at his heels. But rumours from the east and the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and to annihilate many. And verse 45, he will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas. Now that's the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea, and the beautiful holy mountain, that's Mount Zion. So there's a triangle here, the Mediterranean, the Dead Sea, and Mount Zion. So where does he put it? He puts it probably down near Beersheba, where it's a flatter area. And yet he will come to his end. Now listen to this. Yet he will come to his end. That is a Jewish Hebrew metaphor for being killed. And if you want to look, search that phrase in the Old Testament, you will see it comes to countries, individuals, and groups. And it means they are annihilated. And so he will come to his end, so he will die, and no one will help him. And one really sharp person back in Billabong days said, that infers, Stuart, assassination, and it wouldn't surprise me. I haven't seen yet a backup for that, but I can understand that. Please note that this sequence is in the context of the three kings that rise up against him. And from the text, it seems to be that they take separate actions on the part of each of the three kings to take down this identity called the Antichrist. There's no coalition here. It's like separate kings trying to take this guy down. And therefore, this is not his fate at the hand of Jesus in the second advent, because there is another text that describes that final end, and that's in Revelation 19. And it's no contest. Jesus and the Antichrist, absolutely no contest. The last part of verse 45 is fascinating, as it appears to show that he dies physically at the hands of someone or possibly a group, but the description seems to infer assassination. Therefore, look at the context once again. You've got three kings, north, south, and east, and they attack him, and he overcomes them and their armies by difference, because in Daniel chapter 7, 8 and 9, he said he comes up into this 10-king ruling group of people after the Magog War, and he worms his way up through this and takes precedence over them. And three of those 10 kings take umbrage at him, either at the covenant that he signed with Israel, because they probably hate Israel, or that they hate him, ascending above their authority. But this has to be the three kings that he takes out, because he in the Hebrew and Daniel it says he plucks out these three kings. And in the Hebrew it seems to be sequentially. And I haven't got perfect backup for that, but it seems to be. So these three kings are the ones who attack him, and these are the three kings that he kills and devastates. Therefore, look at the context once again. There's these kings and where they come from, and he overcomes them and their armies. So he finally establishes his field quarters down near Beersheba. And so this is interesting. He's been assassinated. He's a supernatural person, but he has to die. And where does he die? And I'll tell you in a minute. Zechariah 11, 15 to 17, it's a fascinating thing. I don't know if you've ever studied this, but this is one of my favourite passages. And it's very, very, very important in prophecy. Zechariah 11, 15 to 17. And the Lord said to me, this is Jesus talking to Zechariah in a vision, take again for yourself the equipment of, a foolish shepherd. It's not a foolish shepherd at all. It's a shocking translation. And I know that in my old 77 NASB, and I know in my Schofield King James, that it's not a foolish shepherd, it's an idle shepherd. Have any of you got your Bibles here and you've got an idol, I-D-O-L? Well, scratch out foolish and put I-D-O-L, all right? Why? Because what do you do with an idol? You worship it, don't you? You don't worship a foolish person, do you? You worship an idol shepherd. That's what an idol is. Take again for yourself the equipment of an idol shepherd. That's what it should be, and it's what it is in the Hebrew. And I don't know. Listen, I don't know why translators do things like that, because they miss the whole point. And, you know, here I am mining the Bible again to put it correct. It is an idol shepherd, someone, and I'll prove it to you in a minute. For behold, this is Jesus speaking to Zechariah, for behold, I am going to raise up a shepherd in the land who will what? Not care for the perishing, seek the scattered, heal the broken, or provide for the one who is exhausted. He doesn't give a hoot about anyone. Do you understand? and yet he is supposed to be over this land because he signed the covenant, and for 3.5 years he is. But something happens and it changes rapidly for the second half. So he has no care for the perishing, the scattered, the broken, the one that is exhorted, but he will devour the flesh of the fat sheep and tear off their hoofs. And verse 17 says this, and I'm going to insert idle because it's not worthless. Woe to the idle shepherd who abandons the flock. A sword will be on his arm and on his right eye. His arm will be totally withered and his right eye will be blind. That's what happened to him when he was assassinated. And you know what? In Revelation 13, these wounds were called fatal wounds. And I know that we've always had some nurses here and sometimes doctors here. And what is a fatal wound? It kills you, do you not? It's not nearly kills you. It's almost killed you. A fatal wound kills you. And so many people have gone and looked at this thing and said, oh, well, he just sort of like went unconscious for a little while. I don't think so, because I'm going to prove where he went. And you don't do it if you're just a little unconscious. And so in Revelation 11, it's just 7. Then there was given to me, this is the angel talking to John in Revelation 11. Then there was given to me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it. That is the temple proper, what's called the naos. But leave out the courtyard which is outside the temple and do not measure it. That's where the court of the Gentiles are and the court of the women. Not interested in that, just the temple. Because it has been given to the nations, those outer courts, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. That's the second half of the tribulation. And verse 3, and I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. That's from the start to the midpoint of the 7 years, so 3.5 years. Clothed in sackcloths. And verse 4 says this, these are the 2 olive trees, Zechariah 4, and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And verse 5, and if anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouth and devours their enemies. So if anyone wants to harm them, it says he, but it should be they must be killed in this way, right? So for 3.5 years, no one can touch them. No one can touch them. They are unkillable. And you've got to understand that because of what happens in a minute. These 2 witnesses have the power to shut up the sky so that the rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying, and they have power over the waters to turn them to blood and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. And please, you can argue all you like who it is, but I like what Fruchtenbaum says, if the Holy Spirit didn't name them, don't guess. That's one of the things I like about him. He's the same with the author of the book of Hebrews. There's all of these people who will fill up the introductions in their own particular versions of the Bible and say, well, it might be this person or Apollos or whatever, Paul and all the rest of it. And John MacArthur in the 2nd edition notes gives a whole bunch of possibles, and he says, don't even bother, because if God hasn't told us, keep silent and wait for the revelation in heaven. And when these 2 have finished their testimony, right smack dab in the middle of the 7 years, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them. Where's he been? Do you know, it's fascinating. Him and his father ended up, spiritual father, end up in the same place but at different times. He was killed and he was sent down into the abyss. And can I please tell you, you don't swoon and go unconscious and go down into the abyss. The abyss is the centre of the earth and it's the hottest place on this planet. And nothing carbon-based can survive there. Do you understand? You have to be soul and spirit down there. And so when he went down there, the interesting thing is, God says in Zechariah, I will raise up. And I have listened to person after person after person on YouTube and social media and says that because he comes up and kills the two witnesses, it must have been Satan that released him from the abyss. That is utter ridiculous. Why? Because he gets put in there for 1,000 years at the start of the millennial kingdom, and if he let out the antichrist, why couldn't he let himself out? It's just illogical nonsense. And so he gets put in there, and this is the thing that most people don't want to acknowledge, that when God wants a final resolution on an issue, he will use the good, the bad and the ugly to get it done. Because there are things that the righteous won't do, but there are things that the evil will do. And you remember when we were doing 2 Thessalonians, I think last week, where it says he will send them a strong delusion, and that's the Antichrist. He will send the world after the church has gone a strong delusion. Why? As a test whether or not you'll come to God or you'll follow that person. And that is the test of your character, your belief, your desire to go either up there. No, and I'm sure people don't desire to go. In fact, no. Some of the guys I work with in the mines, when I became a Christian up there and it became known, they would come to me when I'm just minding my own business, playing pool and that sort of thing, and they'd say, you're a Christian, aren't you? And I said, yeah. So do you think you're going to heaven? I said, well, it's up to him. And he says, oh, well, I'm going to hell and I'm going to party, party, party. Have you ever heard anyone say that? If you haven't, then you've lived in a very cocoon type environment. And, there was even bumper stickers like that people put on their cars 20 years ago. I just don't, what do you do with them? When they have finished their testimony, the beast, this is this annihilated one, comes up out of the abyss and will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. For 3.5 years, no one has been able to lay a finger on those two witnesses. Do you get it? Is it in your mind? Your understanding? I'll just show you what happens in Revelation 13. This is the end. And chapter 13, verse 1, and the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. So this is the border of the Gentile realms. And then I saw a beast coming out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. See, he's already taken out the 3 kings that were attacking him. But the 10 regions still exist, but there's only 7 heads left, because he killed the other ones before the midpoint of the tribulation. And on his horns were 10 crowns, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And you've seen these weird drawings and that sort of thing of what that is. And I haven't got time today to expand that. And verse 2 says this, and the beast that I saw, now listen to this very carefully, and the beast that I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. He didn't look like that, but that's a metaphor of what 3 empires. Who was the leopard? Greece, because it moved so fast when it was attacking. Who was the bear? Persia. And who was the lion? Babylon. So where's Rome? Well, Rome's still here. Do you know you're governed presently by the revived Roman Empire and you don't even know it? It's been renamed the World Economic Forum and all of its offshoots. And so that's why we're living in this kind of world. And so here he says, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were these crowns and blasphemous names. Verse 2, and the beast that I saw was like Greece, and those like Persia, and a mouth like the mouth of a lion. Why is the order reversed? Because in Daniel, it's the lion, the gold, the silver, and the bronze, and the iron. Why is the order reversed? Because Daniel's writing prophecy of what will happen. Babylon was there, but Persia and Greece and Rome weren't there. Do you understand? So we're looking from the future back to what happened. That's why the sequence is reversed. We're looking back onto those things. Just mining. And he says this, I saw one of his heads as if it had been, what? Fatally wounded, and his fatal wound was healed. Now, when Jesus hung on the cross, he had nails through here and a nail through there, right? And to make sure he was dead, a Roman soldier came up on a horse with a spear and stabbed him here and burst a cardi thingy around his heart, the blood and the water. So when he was resurrected, and he went to 6 frightened disciples in a locked room, including Thomas, and Thomas, because Thomas before said, I don't believe he's been resurrected until I actually see him. I don't believe you guys. So Jesus went into this locked room, and Thomas was one of them. And he said, Thomas, put your fingers in the hole in my wrist and put your hand in my side. You see, he still had the wounds on his resurrected body. Do you understand? And I wonder if when we get to heaven, he will still have those. Now, Fruchtenbaum argues that you can't see them in a glorified body, but I think that they might be in some way there, because we are never going to forget what it cost him to get us up there. Do you understand? So this guy has got the same thing. And you know why it's true that he's still got these wounds on his head and the wound and a terrible right arm, and the whole earth was amazed. All right, what corner of the earth at the moment doesn't know that Donald Trump won the election, right? I think there's an igloo in the furthest part of the Arctic that still know that Bumpy Trumpy won the election. It's far more with this guy. He was so famous for 3.5 years, then he was killed with these fatal wounds, and then he's resurrected up out of the abyss, and he's got these same these wounds, these manifests of his wounding. And the whole earth was amazed. Oh, he's been resurrected. He must be the real God. And they followed after him, and they worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with him? Why do they say that? Because he was the one that killed the 2 witnesses in Jerusalem, because no one else could. Do you understand? And so they say, okay, it's him, so who would possibly wage war with him? And verse 5, a mouth was given to him speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for how long? What's 42 months? 3.5 years. The second half of the tribulation, and that was given to him. And he opened who by? Don't tell me Satan. He doesn't have a finger in this pie at all, because he's there to persecute Israel so badly that they cry out in Hosea 5:15, chapter 6, 1 and 2. Hosea 5:15 says, I will go and return to my place, and the rabbis acknowledge this as a messianic message. I will go and return to my place. This is Jesus speaking. So if he is returning to his place, he must have come from his place. Is that not logical? Right? So he's going, because they rejected him the first time. And so he says, and I will wait until they acknowledge their offence, and in the indignation they will cry out to me. And in chapter 6, 1 and 2, that's the prayer that they cry out to Jesus, saying, come back, otherwise we're all going to be killed. That's why that time was shortened, because all flesh would be destroyed. And so it was also given him to make war with the saints, that's the believers who are Gentiles, and to overcome them, and authority was given to him over every tribe, people, language, and nation. And verse 8, and all who live on the earth will what? Worship him. Now that's bad translation, because we know that in Matthew 25, when Jesus teaches the sheep and goat judgment of the nations, that there are believers there that didn't take the mark and got through the second half. And the same thing is in Ezekiel 20, 33 to 38. He judges the surviving Jewish people, puts them over on the plain of Moab, and makes them walk through the Jordan River under his staff, and he gets rid of every non-believer in that time, the Jewish non-believers. And I get sick and tired of these people who say, oh, and all Israel will be saved. It's not all Israel will be saved, it's all Israel that believes in him. Do you understand? Because Paul in Romans chapter 9 says, not all Israel is Israel. You might be ethnically Israel, but unless you believe in your Messiah, you're not the true Israel. I haven't got time to fix up 1 Timothy 6:16, but anyway, we'll get there one day. And all who live on the earth will worship him, and everyone whose name has not been written in the foundation of the world in the book of the life of the Lamb who has been slaughtered. Everyone's going to worship this guy except true believers. And at the end of the day, all of this is a testing mechanism. You know, people ask me lots of questions, and they say, well, Adam and Eve were given a test in the Garden of Eden, and it was a tree. A tree in the midst of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't touch it. That's all they had not to do. And what did they do? What do you do with a grandson, all right? Don't. And he goes, yes, I will. It's human nature. And so at the end of the day, so they were tempted by a tree, but what are Christians tempted by? Well, Jesus was hung on a tree. And people say, oh, but it was a cross. Well, what was it made of? 2 planks from a point made. Do you understand? It's so easy. If someone just said, you just read it, but you've got to read it carefully. And do you know why? I've always been a champion of punctuation, because with punctuation, everything makes sense, because it wants you to stop and think or start again. Father, we just come before you now in the name of Jesus, and Father, we just honour you for this ability, Father, to still in this strange world that we live in, Father, to come and worship you, to fellowship with others, Father, and to digest your word, Father, so that we can come to a fuller understanding of who you are, how much you have loved us, Father, and that you have an incredible, incredible destiny waiting for every believer, and it's just over the horizon, Father. And all God's people said,